Hey everyone, happy Pride Month! Welcome to FoxxTales. I'm FoxxC, your hostess with the mostest, and I'm here to talk about talking, and stories, and artwork, and myself, and the meaning of life. If you've watched my show before, you've probably already noticed that I sound different for this one. It's a deliberate performance choice, but it's also an exploration of identity and artistic craft, which makes it a great topic for discussing stories. Which is what this channel is supposed to be about, apparently. There are some big questions here. Where does a person end and their performance begin? And who is performance for, anyhow? And why the fox do we go through the trouble? Prologue. The theory.
Gender ought not to be construed as a stable identity or locus of agency from which various acts follow. Rather, gender is an identity tenuously constituted in time, instituted in an exterior space through a stylized repetition of acts. The effect of gender is produced through the stylization of the body, and hence must be understood as the mundane way in which bodily gestures, movements, and styles of various kinds constitute the illusion of an abiding gendered self. This formulation moves the conception of gender off the ground of a substantial model of identity to one that requires a conception of gender as a constituted social temporality. Significantly, if gender is instituted through acts which are internally discontinuous, then the appearance of substance is precisely that, a constructed identity, a performative accomplishment which the mundane social audience, including the actors themselves, come to believe and to perform in the mode of belief. Gender is also a norm that can never be fully internalized. The internal is a surface signification, and gender norms are finally phantasmic, impossible to embody. If the ground of gender identity is the stylized repetition of acts through time, and not a seemingly seamless identity, then the spatial metaphor of a ground will be displaced and revealed as a stylized configuration, indeed, a gendered corporealization of time. The abiding gendered self will then be shown to be structured by repeated acts that seek to approximate the ideal of a substantial ground of identity, but which, in their occasional discontinuity, reveal the temporal and contingent groundlessness of this ground. The possibilities of gender transformation are to be found precisely in the arbitrary relation between such acts, in the possibility of a failure to repeat, a deformity, or a parodic repetition that exposes the phantasmic effect of abiding identity as a politically tenuous construction.
Published in 1990, Judith Butler's Gender Trouble asserts that neither gender identity or sex has a fundamental essence, that they are not based on a universal set of intrinsic characteristics. They conclude, therefore, that these identities are the product of ongoing, stylized performances, a gendered corporealization of time. We can also expand this idea to identity in general. One can suppose that all identities are illusory and corporealized in time as part of the social drama. Gamer? Constructed identity. YouTuber? Constructed identity. White person? Constructed identity. All illusory identities constructed out of an ongoing performance of acts attributed to those identities. It's important to note the fact that while these identities are illusions, in the sense that they are not permanent objects from which the acts spring, it does not change the fact that the acts that compose them have material consequences. By the time I finally read through Gender Trouble for this video, I realized that so many ideas in it had filtered their way to me through cultural osmosis that I had a familiar feeling that none of my ideas are particularly new, or even my own. A more comforting realization is that these ideas are still a result of observing and reflecting on my lived experience. I came to similar conclusions through the same manner, more slowly and much less eloquently. This video is not meant as an academic essay in its quoted and noted rigor, though it's well grounded in theory. This tale is about my experiences exploring artistic performance and gender performance in search of an identity, how this theory is written on and through my body. It's about crafting a voice, a performance that speaks to the identity that you desire to construct. Act 1. Voicing Identity.
I was born in June, the month that would become Pride Month, years ago. I was late and breech, so I was a C-section baby. The ritual performance of my gender began almost immediately when I was declared and named. After that, I'd rather not talk about it.
The way we express ourselves is indelibly linked to our identity, and language is the most common performance that human beings use to express themselves. We've developed hundreds of languages, collections of verbal and gesticular signifiers organized and given collective meaning in order to allow for complex communication. We use it to categorize and explain the world, ourselves, each other. We also frequently make sounds and gestures that have no signifier or organization. They're just emotion emoted. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures who, for better or worse, are habituated to categorizing one another based on those verbal and nonverbal cues. Things like posture, gait, gesticulation, word choice, diction, accent, tone, and pitch directly affect how humans respond when communicating with one another. From a purely biochemical perspective, this sounds kind of cool. Like, it is kind of cool. On the other hand, people frequently use these cues to make racist, classist, ableist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, or otherwise bigoted assumptions about others. When I was writing this video, I picked up a phone call and answered it in this voice, like, "Hi, this is Fox," and immediately got sirred, and I was just like, "Welp, that was dysphoria-inducing, never gonna answer like that again," which is easier said than done. This technique, called code switching, is common among non-white and LGBTQ2IA+ folk, and anyone else who has to compartmentalize segments of their identity in order to safely function in the dominant society. The term code switching is actually a really broad term in linguistics, covering anything from multilingual speakers switching between languages to people moving to a specific topic with specific jargon, to doing a voice when they quote someone. Personally, I had to learn entirely new ways to speak and move so I didn't get my ass beat flipping eighths in college. Being told, "You talk like a cop," was, unflattering. So I started to look more closely at how verbal and nonverbal communication impacted my identity and relationships. It's been a journey. Act 2. Crafting your voice.
Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery that mediocrity can pay to greatness.
Butler establishes that all styles of behavior are, at some level, derived from imitation, but also that there is no original object to be imitated, just a series of referential parodies of an impossible ideal. When I was young and desperately trying to figure out how to boy, I would imitate the characters from stories that held what I perceived to be appropriately masculine attributes. I constructed a performance out of quotes, factoids, and mannerisms borrowed from the screen. My performance was passable, but extremely mediocre. Ugh, fine. Have your pop culture reference.
Mediocre.
The huge irony here being, of course, that I was terrified of performing anything but that carefully structured identity. Drama class was a torture of embarrassment, as though any attempt to explore any other identity would give the game away. And now look at me. Every art or writing teacher I've had, every creator I have listened to talk about their craft, every single person who has talked about becoming a skilled anything, in any medium, at some point has said something like, figure out what works for you, or find your own style, or you need to find your own artistic voice. They usually follow that up with some advice on how to find this unique voice, which is almost always, develop your craft. That sounds like a fancy teacher way to say, go practice these fundamental techniques a bunch, but it's also more than that, as I had to learn over time. Craft involves observation, imitation, experimentation, performance, and reflection. It's as much about self-discovery as it is skill building. I have been a professional weirdo for quite some time now, including, but not limited to, the year I spent running around dressed like this. For everything. Everything. Partly to see how people would respond, partly because I found the experimentation and performance valuable lessons in self-expression. Upon reflection, I found out what aspects of that process worked and what didn't, what I should integrate and what I should discard. Also, that I was reacting to gender dysphoria and internalized transphobia in a totally healthy way. This is the believe me face. I've used a similar process developing myself as a writer, a filmmaker, a dancer. Go do stuff. Mess it up. Think about it. Try again. Really useful for the awkwardness of figuring out who I want to be as a woman.
Ever tried? Ever failed? No matter. Try again. Fail again. Fail better.
Okay, I'm going to indulge in a rare flex, so, please humor me. I haven't done any formal voice training. Zero. Zip. Nada. Zilch. I haven't had a coach, used an app, or watched any YouTube videos. When the gender clinic asked if I wanted to look into voice training, I said, well, I'm a voice actor, so I think I'm going to be fine. And yep, I'm pretty fine. Growing up, I always liked to play with my voice, like character voices and impressions, sound effects, and beatboxing. One of my earliest memories is of me trying to imitate a motorcycle. This is the voice I use when I record Nikki. Hey, what's up? I'm a blue monster. I still have to pitch that one up in post, but a girl has her limits. Finding a comfortable femme pitch for my speaking voice was just more of that. Observation, imitation, experimentation, performance, reflection. Lots of talking to my kitty. Such fluff. So fierce. Whoop, whoop. Meow, 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 boop, boop, meow. Oh my god, you're doing. Oh no, this was a mistake. Huge mistake, you got me. Ah, such teeth. Learning to make nonverbal noises and laugh in the target pitch, and also to make it sound natural. This shit's hard, yo. Thankfully, I have a lot of time right now. Act 3. Living your voice.
We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but a habit.
I really enjoy being an athletic person. Sport, dance, and martial arts are a big part of my identity and expression, and all of that was taken away about 4 years ago in a serious car accident. I was lucky that I didn't suffer any major structural injuries, but it was enough to really mess up the muscles in my hips, my back, my shoulders, my neck. Pretty much everything was moving in ways that they weren't supposed to compensate for the damage. It's taken me most of the 4 years since the accident to make a dent in repairing it, rehabituating my entire body to move with healthy biomechanics. Because I lacked the time and money to allow myself to be completely dedicated to fixing my body, the only way to practice and integrate the movements I needed was to find a way to make them as much a part of my daily life as possible, so that I could get back to being physically emotive the way I want to be. This has been the same story for literally everything I've ever wanted to get good at. If I don't make it a habit, I either stop doing it and either plateau or lose it altogether. If you really, really want to achieve mastery in a craft, you have to find a way to integrate observation, imitation, experimentation, performance, and reflection of that craft into as many aspects of your life as possible. I restructure my environments in order to encourage new behaviors and discourage old ones. I block social media when I need to, which is often, aggressively often. I surround myself with messages and people that inspire me towards what I want to achieve. I put the things that I want to do front and center so that I can't avoid them. I try to keep in mind the fact that the work I do isn't just for me, but so I can be better prepared to assist the community around me. This can be super hard, not just because of time or money or motivation, but because we all have current habits, mannerisms, ways of speaking, ways of thinking, ways of being. They're automatic. They're distracting. They're comfortably familiar. Even if those habits suck, they're the default setting that we're currently working with. My back was completely foxed after the accident, but my brain was saying, well, these are the normal positions, so that was the current default, and it definitely sucked. Talking, like walking, is something that most of us do, but few of us really spend a lot of time thinking about it. We learn enough to get around and that's it. Most of us subconsciously develop a default speaking voice over our lives. Some people, like singers and actors, learn how to control their voices as part of their disciplines, but most of those people still have a normal, habitual voice that they use. Trans and non-binary people looking to perform a voice that more accurately matches their gender identity are struggling to replace this deeply ingrained habit that involves nearly every aspect of their lives, including like your internal voice. It's super weird. I'm still working on habituating myself 2 years down the road. Still working on getting my face and throat muscles to make the right shapes all the time. Still catch myself slipping. If I'm not paying any attention to how I'm speaking, sometimes I'll end up
sounding like this. It's frustrating, and I've never felt like it was good at expressing the way I wanted to express.
I am constantly observing my voice and my posture so that I can make adjustments and form the habits I want. The practice of forming habits is a long, frequently solitary process. I spend a lot more time practicing and reflecting than I do performing. I'm like a high-performance aircraft. I require 2 to 4 hours of maintenance for every 1 hour of flight time. Okay, that was the motivational portion. I promise it's not all gonna be like that. Act 4, performance. Anxiety.
All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts.
Hang on. I know it's Shakespeare, but it's not very inclusive. Let's change it up a bit.
You're not seriously going to rewrite one of the most famous quotes in the English language just to accommodate gender diversity, are you?
Sure am. This is my story, and that's how I like it. Here, try this one.
Okay, here goes. All the world's a stage, and all the men, women, and NBs merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one in their time plays many parts. Jacques, As You Like It, by William Shakespeare. Sort of.
Shakespeare's play, As You Like It, is a pastoral comedy about a woman named Rosalind who disguises herself as a boy, Ganymede, and flees to the forest of Arden with her cousin to seek safety from her uncle who has usurped her father's throne. The ephemeral nature of the performance of living, particularly of gender performance, is a central theme of the play, and much of the drama is derived from the layered gender reversals that affect Rosalind's relationships throughout the story. This play would have made me so fucking uncomfortable as a teenager. I wish I'd read it then. Rosalind becomes Ganymede and obscures her identity in order to be physically safe, but it causes all sorts of turmoil when the nobleman, Orlando, falls for Rosalind, and the shepherdess, Phoebe, falls for Ganymede. Rosalind, as Ganymede, promises to cure Orlando of his love by impersonating the object of his affections in order to dissuade him of his passions. Since Rosalind would have been played by a boy in the Elizabethan theatre, the metatext of this play has a boy playing a girl masquerading as a boy, impersonating a girl. When I started this channel a little over 2 years ago, I faced a serious decision as to whether or not to perform as an out trans woman from the beginning. I'd seen other creators and celebrities come out well into their careers and be suddenly thrust into a new spotlight without really having a lot of lived experience to work from, followed by the inevitable confusion and backlash. I also didn't want to put off a creative career in order to transition. So much of being trans is just like choosing your flavor of pain. At any rate, you can go back through my videos and watch me awkwardly figure myself out if you like, as I also scramble to find a voice for this channel. Fun times. I thought I had a pretty good idea going in and kind of got sidetracked. I don't know. I experimented, made a bunch of mistakes, was blown off course by the vicissitudes of fate, both on this channel and in transition. think I've managed to stay close to my main idea, though, which is that people are a collection of stories in the process of being told. We are complex, ongoing performances as much as we are biological organisms. Sometimes performance is just for us, for the joy of feeling expressive, for the comfort of familiarity, for the practice of establishing habits, for creating an identity. Sometimes the performance is entirely for an audience. Those don't usually go very well. My parents wanted me to be a lawyer. Now I'm just a trans girl on the internet. Most performances, however, are kind of in between, existing in the interplay between performers and their audience. The world is a stage and we are all merely players. In life, we are simultaneously a performer and audience. We become habituated through practice and repetition to expressing our identity to an audience through the performance of the stories that we've established for it, just as the members of that audience, our family, friends, colleagues, neighbors, and so on, are doing the same with us. We become so habituated to our roles, as does the audience, that trying to establish a new one for ourselves meets with resistance, both inside and out. That resistance is what I was trying to avoid when I made the decision to host this channel with this performance. I was largely successful here, but trans people and others who encounter systemic violence centered on their identities face these performance decisions with every single interaction. And every time we know the consequences of making the wrong decision. We know what the resistance will be. We've heard the jokes. We've seen the movies. We've been threatened. We know. Sometimes the performance just isn't worth the risk. I sure as shit don't doll myself up to go smoke joints down by the highway. Were it not better, because that I am more than common tall, that I did suit me all points like a man? A gallant curtleaxe upon my thigh, a boar spear in my hand, and in my heart lie there what hidden woman's fear there will. We'll have a swashing and a martial outside, as many other mannish cowards have, that do outface it with their semblances. I feel a ton of performance anxiety around my identity. That my performance is going to be invalidated. That no matter what I do, people will exclude me or be disgusted by me or want to hurt me. That it's safer to play Ganymede in his inauthenticity than it is to live as Rosalind and challenge the narrative of cis-heteronormativity. I love how I look and feel when I go full femme, even if it means that I have to take a few extra breaths in the wings before I step on stage to settle the anxiety. Because I know that this show will go on with or without me. Eventually, I have to step out and perform. Act 5, Trauma and Healing.
Whereas a Marxian road to revolution would have the factory workers lead the process, We are beginning to recognize that the new paradigms may come from those who in fields, kitchens, and fishing villages across the planet struggle to disentangle their reproduction from the hold of corporate power and to preserve our common wealth. Along these lines, workers' struggles today follow a different pattern than the traditional strike, reflecting a search for new models of protest and new relations between human beings and between human beings and nature. We see the same phenomenon in the growth of commenting practices like time banks, urban gardens, and community accountability structures. We see it also in the preference for androgynous models of gender identity, the rise of the transsexual and intersex movements, and the queer rejection of gender, with its implied rejection of the sexual division of labor. We must also mention the global diffusion in the passion for tattoos, and the art of body decoration, that is creating new and imagined communities across sex, race, and class boundaries. All these phenomena point not only to a breakdown of disciplinary mechanisms, but to a profound desire for a remodeling of our humanity in ways different from, in fact, opposite to, those that centuries of capitalist industrial discipline have tried to impose on us.
The most difficult part of life is that trauma happens repeatedly and frequently without meaningful consent to our bodies, to our emotions, to our identities. We collect scars until we die. Maybe you took a chunk out of your hand working in a hot kitchen for minimum wage. Maybe you've had your nose broken a half a dozen times. Maybe you went through a puberty you didn't want and spent with your body growing to fill a role it hurts to perform. Once it's happened, you can't change it. You can only put in the time to undo the damage and find a way to integrate a story of those scars that you can carry going forward. Reinventing yourself is necessarily a process of trauma and healing. It forces one to reevaluate the relationships and performances in one's life. If you change careers, for example, you're going to have new professional relationships in a new environment, which will have new dynamics. Maybe you'll perform your stories in a slightly different way in order to feel comfortable. Perhaps by changing the emphasis you place on certain elements, or the lessons you drew from an experience. Maybe you'll have norms imposed upon your performance of identity by your workplace through a dress code, script, or corporate culture. Cover your tattoos, cut your hair, wear a tie. Our bodies, particularly the bodies of women, queer, and racialized people, are still battlegrounds of resistance against colonization and the logic of industrialization. Reproductive rights and the rights of transgender people to access gender-affirming care are the current flashpoints in the struggle between a politics of control and exploitation and one of liberation. Coming out as queer will shake up all of one's relationships. Coming out could destroy them entirely if the resistance is strong enough. It's why people stay in the closet. It's why many trans women come out slowly. It's why it's called coming out. Just stepping out my door and putting my very gender non-conforming body in the world is a performance that, without speaking, expresses a voice of resistance to the paradigm of cis heteronormativity. Not only are we experimenting with expressing through the performance of a different gender, but also our audience, our relations, are realigning their own performances. When this results in mutual support and affirmation, it is a revolutionary process. There is trauma and healing to go around here. As I said before, deconstructing and reorganizing relations is necessarily traumatic to the self and to others. I can feel compassion for people whose sense of self is disrupted by someone they know radically altering a firmly habituated performance. People upon whose bodies unmindful habit has engraved a calcified identity. I can even have sympathy for people who struggle to form new habits when they have never had to do such a thing. That said, it is seriously incumbent on cisgender heterosexual people to make a fucking effort to act for the comfort of their queer relations. That means actively practicing names and pronouns when those relations aren't around so you don't struggle in person, and being seen in public with them, and advocating for their identity with others, and sheltering them from physical and economic violence, and sitting with your discomfort quietly, and taking up a tiny fragment of the risk we do through living an authentic performance. The same applies to our disabled, racialized, and otherwise oppressed relations as well. Construct space for us in your performances. Practice inclusivity. Tell radical stories. Lend us your voice. Make it a habit. Epilogue. Embrace the drama.
Dear, dear, how queer everything is today. And yesterday things went on just as usual. I wonder if I've been changed in the night. Well, let me think. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost think I can remember feeling a little different. But if I'm not the same, the next question is, who in the world am I? Ah, that's the great puzzle.
If our identities are as ephemeral as I have claimed, if they are constructed moment to moment out of our collective performances, then the identity I have now is different than the one I had when I started this project. Even this video is a snapshot of a single performance for an ever-changing audience, an illusion of permanence that will only last as long as these electronic signals allow it. The woman I'll be tomorrow will be long past by the time you watch this. And you, dear viewer, your identity is no longer the same having seen it. It's a terrifying idea, isn't it? To think that the self you identify so strongly with in this moment is just an illusion? That you're just a body making its way from cradle to grave in an uncaring universe? That your voice, your movements, your being are just a series of habits programmed by repetition and can be shattered by the tiniest realization? Or by a limo running a red light? Why go through all the effort of habituating new identities if all we are tears in rain? In the very first video on this channel, I talked about a model of understanding the universe that challenges this meaninglessness. A mythology that sees the whole functioning of existence as a consciousness that, through the drama of interwoven performances, seeks to understand itself. When we apply this idea to ourselves, that we are each a performance of consciousness in action, we find it is ripe with radical potential. We are here to perform, to play, to act, to create meaning through our exploration of ourselves and each other. Existential dread could just as easily be existential humor.
Since everything is but an illusion, perfect in being what it is, having nothing to do with good or bad, acceptance or rejection, one might as well burst out laughing.
Early in my transition, I found myself struggling to identify with the potentials and stereotypes of trans femininity. I felt I needed to be a positive representation of my people, that there were expectations, that I needed to be a normal tran, but also not like the other girls. What a maroon!
The loss of the sense of the normal, however, can be its own occasion for laughter, especially when the normal, the original, is revealed to be a copy and an inevitably failed one, an ideal that no one can embody. In this sense, laughter emerges in the realization that all along the original was derived.
It certainly takes the performance anxiety down a few notches to realize that there is no ideal of woman to live up to, cis or trans. There are no traits that intrinsically compose an identity. It is a liberating feeling to realize that you are not defined by pre-existing criteria based upon the components of your physical form. That the meaning of life is to be silly and playful and weird and colorful. To remind everyone that this is all a drama in which we are players who, before we take our leave, have the power to craft a role for ourselves. I still love to play with my voice. I mess around with it every day, just for the joy of it. Sure, it makes it easier for me to perform this specific aspect of trans femininity, but it doesn't define me as a person or as a woman. It will never stop being delightful to go from this
To stadium announcer voice. Just because.
it's fun being a girl
Playing a boy. Or a robot. Or a monster.
boots and cats and boots and cats and
Cats and boots and cats and boots and boots. Cats and boots, cats and boots. Cats, boots, cats, boots, cats, boots, cats, boots, cats, boots, cats, boots.
She's a bass.
We can rewrite our roles. We can remake our bodies. We can be who we want to be in the moment. We can have so much fun shaking the normative foundations of our relations. We can lend voices to sing the story of a world where we can all thrive. Hey everyone! Thanks for sticking around to watch me talk about myself. First, I'd like to give a shout out to all of the wonderful people who lent their vocal talents to the show. J.S. Solis, Emily, RunswithSpoons, Adnan, Alexandra Apteropith, Sonic232, Velu, and a very special thanks to David J. Bradley for humoring my whimsy as Shakespeare. Many of them are fantastic creators in their own right, and links to their work can be found in the description. I'd also really like to thank the FoxxTales patrons. Your support has been incredible, and I appreciate it more than I can put into words. If you, dear viewer, would like to support the show, the easiest way is to like and share this video. Subscribe to my channel, leave comments in the comment section, and keep an eye out for future projects by following me on social media. Links also in the description. You might also consider direct support by making a one-time donation through Ko-fi.com or becoming a patron on Patreon.com. Links right there and below. Patrons get perks like behind-the-scenes photos, outtake videos, and early updates on stories in progress. Speaking of which, I have a book to announce. Myself, along with 3 other trans and non-binary writers, conspired to put together an anthology project of really cool future punk stories. I just got the first drafts and they're fantastic. I'm really excited because these are super talented writers with some really amazing ideas. The anthology is going to be called Rumble and Grow, and it comes out hopefully in the fall. And if you'd like to keep abreast of updates for that, again, follow me on social media, and I'll be posting some excerpts and teasers and some more info over the next few months as we work through the rest of the project. I think that's it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon. This is FoxxC, signing off.